Okay, so the value I have chosen to talk about today is it's not communicated when it's said, it's communicated when it is understood. I'm worried my presentation is going to be a little bit long. Brevity is not my strong suit when I'm passionate about something, and I'm actually really passionate about this value. So buckle up. I'll keep it as short as I can. I'm going to talk first about what I think this value means, and then I'm going to give you a bit more personal context. So have you ever had a conversation that felt like it went something like this? You might start what you think is going to be a very simple conversation with someone, but you're surprised or confused about the way they respond. So you ask them to clarify, but the response that they give you is even more confusing. So what has actually been communicated here in this situation? Communication is about what the other person hears, not what you say. If I tell someone, for example, that I like pasta Alfredo and they mishear me, I might be served mashed potato next time I go over to their house for dinner. If I happen to hate mashed potato, that would be a kind of unfortunate outcome. However unlikely that may be, because I think that probably everyone loves mashed potato, but it's just an example. So the meaning of your communication is the response that you get. It doesn't matter what you meant to say. The ultimate meaning lies in what the listener hears and how they respond to it. And if what I say doesn't make any sense to the other person, no meaning or communication happens at all. Communication is much more than just words. So I'm talking, first of all, here about spoken communication, but I'm also going to talk about written communication and how it's different a bit later on. Gestures and body language, facial expressions, tone of voice, the pitch of your voice, these are all things that help humans to convey meaning. The good news is that we can use them to help us in our spoken communication, but the bad news is that they are also places where communication can break down and misinterpretations can occur. Communication is incredibly complex, and this means that it can be very tricky to get it right. The complexity of what happens in interactions between humans is something we can barely fathom. When we speak to someone, all kinds of stuff is going on. We're constantly trying to guess what they might be thinking. We're trying to gauge the impression we're making on them. We're trying to figure out whether or not the person is even listening. And if they're not, then we try to figure out what we can do to regain their attention. And at the same time, we also have to think about whether or not what we are saying could somehow be misinterpreted. So communication requires being simultaneously self-aware and aware of the other person. We all know this and we all do this. The way we speak to a toddler is very different to the way that we speak to a police officer. And the way that we speak to a police officer is very different to the way that we speak to our best friend or our partner. When we communicate, we use whatever information we have about the person to tailor our message, to adjust it accordingly so that our message has the best chance of being communicated accurately. However, the truth is that no matter how well we know the other person, the information we have about others is always limited, because every single individual person is completely unique and incredibly complex. Every person is a whole universe. Everyone has their own personal history and experience that underlies everything they hear and influences how they interpret things. And we don't have access to the inside of anyone else's head apart from our own. We usually have intuitions that can help us in our communications, but it's important to respect the complexity that's involved. And that's why it's important to pay attention in our interactions, to think about both who we're speaking to think about who we're speaking to and to observe them and listen to them throughout the conversation. Okay, so personal context for me. I really love that this is one of our values at Shocklogic. As a writer, I'm someone who makes her living based on communication, so it makes sense that this idea would be important to me. but it's a very personal thing as well. I have always had a really strong drive to express myself, and I've always felt very strongly that the burden of communicating my thoughts and feelings lies with me, that I'm the one who has to get it right. I have kind of a phobia of misunderstandings. I really hate them. I really value smooth communication, and I think that I genuinely do everything I can to make that happen. My goal anytime I communicate is to do my best to prevent miscommunication. But that definitely doesn't mean that I always succeed. In my case, in fact, I think that caring so much causes problems of its own, because my extreme desire to communicate carefully means that I often have a lot of anxiety about communication. And that doesn't do me any favors. I worry so much about the possibility of being misinterpreted that if I'm speaking, I just end up tripping over myself and the flow of my words gets all stopped up like a blocked drain. Or it takes me an hour to write a really simple email. So in my case, communication sometimes gets inhibited that way. It's definitely about finding a balance, and you do have to trust yourself as well. So yeah, this kind of brings me to the differences between spoken and written communication. I personally tend to find spoken communication more stressful than written communication because writing gives you a lot more time to think about what you're saying and to find the best words to express what you mean. So we talked about the fact that communication is more than just words, and that's very true, but I think word choice is important as well. Our language is capable of conveying profound nuances and subtleties, and the words you choose do matter. And in writing, of course, word choice matters even more because you can't rely on those other cues. So in a way, writing simplifies things, but the disadvantage, of course, and one of the reasons many other people prefer spoken communication, is that you can't see or hear the other person to gauge their reaction. So you can't adjust your words based on that feedback in real time. In writing, it's also a lot harder to backtrack. So it's that much more important to get it right the first time. And written words also have a permanence, I think, that spoken communication doesn't. If a correction needs to be made, it sometimes doesn't come until quite a while later, after the miscommunication has already had time to take root in a person's mind. So if you do get it wrong in writing, the miscommunication can feel like a bigger deal. Anyway, to go back to what I was saying earlier, for me, there's no better feeling than when I feel like I found the perfect words to say what I mean. I love words and I love getting it right. Sometimes I even feel like my words are so good that it would be impossible for anyone to misinterpret them. And it's this feeling that sometimes happens to me that makes me love to write and want to dedicate my life to communication. On the other hand, as I said, I hate miscommunication so much. And for me, there's no worse feeling than when I feel like I've got it wrong. And this happens a lot, to be honest, no matter how hard I try. And even sometimes during those moments when I thought that I'd got it absolutely perfect. For all the reasons I talked about earlier, every individual is a whole universe, and there are always ways for things to be misinterpreted. So this is something that I have to remind myself of a lot. Miscommunication happens. It's part of life. Like anything else, how we are able to communicate fluctuates based on all kinds of factors: tiredness, stress, self-confidence, how clearly we're thinking in that moment. And also, like anything else, some people are more naturally good at it than others. I think the important thing to remember is that it's a skill we can all develop if we work at it. I think, as in all areas of our lives, a growth mindset is really helpful here. So it's not communicated when it's said, it's communicated when it's understood. I think that this value is ultimately about humility. That means not making too many assumptions, accepting and acknowledging that communication is a complex process and we can never know exactly what another person is thinking. It's about respect for the needs of the other person, and again, for the complexity of language and the process of communication itself. It's about accepting responsibility. When miscommunication occurs, Getting defensive and or blaming the other person should never be our knee-jerk reaction. And it's about conscientiousness, which really just means doing our best in the moment, slowing down, taking in, asking questions, double checking, explicitly checking whether the person has understood or not. All right, that's the end of my presentation. Thank you so much, guys.